Why did the storm sound louder tonight than any night before? No one could say for sure, but the men in the rusted shelter swore it was alive. The corrugated metal shook like a rattled cage. Wind screeched through cracks in the walls and the floor trembled under every roll of thunder. They sat pressed shoulder to shoulder, rifles leaning against their legs, eyes darting at every groan the storm made. Not one of them wanted to be the first to speak the truth, that the storm outside wasn't just weather. It was a test, one that already felt lost. And then she moved. Slow, silent. Her boots sank into puddles that reflected the pale glow of lightning. She wasn't rushing like the others, who had scrambled to secure the walls with sandbags and crates. She wasn't muttering like the sergeant, who kept counting ammo under his breath as though numbers could shield him. She wasn't shaking like the private in the corner, his helmet too big for his head, his hands too small to grip the rifle without trembling. She just walked calm. Measured steps, heels planting, weight rolling, toes setting down as if every movement had been rehearsed 1,000 times. Her posture was upright, steady. Her chin tilted slightly down, but her eyes scanned the room like she was listening to a language only she could hear. And that's what unnerved them most. Her calm wasn't natural. It was defiant. The storm pounded harder, rain lashing against the roof like bullets. A bolt of lightning cracked so close the shelter shivered, the lamps flickering. A few of the men ducked instinctively, one cursed under his breath. But she didn't blink, didn't flinch. She set a hand on the wall, fingers spread, feeling the vibration of the storm. And when she pulled her hand back, she flexed it once, like a pianist testing keys. "Who is she?" someone whispered. The captain heard it. He didn't answer. He kept his eyes on her, though longer than a commanding officer should, not with suspicion, not with trust either, something in between. She wasn't part of their unit, everyone knew that. She had no right to be here. An attachment, they called her, a specialist, but no one explained what that meant. She wore the same fatigues, the same boots, the same dirt across her skin, yet her shoulders carried no insignia worth saluting. No patch to tell her story, just silence. And that silence was heavier than the storm itself. One of the men finally broke. "We're not making it through this," the private muttered. His voice was small, swallowed almost instantly by the howl of wind. He had freckles, barely out of training. His hand shook so badly on his rifle that the magazine rattled. "We're not gonna." She turned slowly. Her eyes met his. She didn't say a word. But the way she looked at him, level, steady, almost painfully calm, it stopped his voice cold. He swallowed. His lips pressed shut. And without knowing why, he loosened his grip on the rifle. His breathing slowed. Not because she comforted him, because she scared him. That was her gift, though none of them understood it yet. She didn't need words. Her silence commanded. The captain shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "We'll move when the storm clears." He tried to sound firm, authoritative. His words rattled against the metal walls, flat and fragile compared to the roar outside. But even he noticed the way her gaze lingered on the storm beyond the doorway. As if she knew something he didn't. What was she waiting for? Hours crawled. Rain slammed. Time bled together. The men tried to sleep in shifts, but sleep never came. Every creak of the roof jolted them awake. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching threat. She didn't try to sleep. She sat near the doorway, knees bent, rifle across her lap. Every few minutes she tilted her head as though listening for something buried beneath the storm. Her fingers tapped against the rifle's stock once, twice, 3 times, then stilled. Always the same rhythm. The private who'd spoken earlier watched her from across the room. His curiosity grew heavier than his fear. Finally, he whispered to the soldier beside him, "Why isn't she scared?" The older soldier shook his head. "She's not normal, you can see it. Look at her hands, not shaking, not even flexing. That ain't normal." "She's done this before," another voice muttered. But none of them knew. None of them could know what she carried. What does a soldier think about when silence becomes louder than war? For her, silence was never empty. It was filled with ghosts. The silence of a letter in her hands, ink bleeding from rain when she first read it. The silence of a flag folded into a triangle, pressed into her palms by hands that refused to meet her eyes. The silence of her brother's dog tags, cold against her skin, heavier than any weapon she'd ever carried. He had been everything, her compass, her shield, the one who believed in her when no one else did, and he had died in a valley not so different from this place. No body sent home, no answers, just silence. That silence had broken her once. Now it was the only thing that held her together. She didn't join to chase glory, she didn't even join to fight. She joined to understand, to trace his steps, to walk where he walked, to learn why he gave everything and returned with nothing. And now here she was, with strangers who didn't trust her, in a mission already cracking at the seams. Men who were breaking under the weight of the storm. Men who thought storms ended things. She knew better. Storms didn't end you. They revealed you. The captain finally broke the waiting silence. He snapped open a map across a table, holding the edges down with rocks so the wind wouldn't snatch it away. His voice was gruff, tired. "We're cut off. The roads are gone. Safe houses compromised. Air supports grounded. We wait until dawn and reassess." The sergeant leaned over the map. His eyes dark, hollow. "Reassess what? We're surrounded by mud and rain. If we don't move, we'll rot here." No one spoke. They all stared at the map as though it were a coffin lid. Each line crossed out, each red marker struck through, a memory of someone they'd already lost. Finally, one soldier broke. His voice cracked like glass. "Why are we still here?" The question lingered. No one wanted to answer it, not even the captain. She did. Her voice was soft, barely above the storm, but it carried sharp as a blade. "Because someone else is waiting." The words sliced through the silence. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. "What the hell does that mean?" the sergeant snapped. She stepped closer, tapped the map with one gloved finger. The Eastern Valley, a narrow pass, dangerous, avoided by every route planner for good reason. "If we don't move tonight, we'll lose the window. And someone out there," she paused, scanning their faces, "someone you don't even know yet, will pay for our hesitation." Her certainty rattled them. Because how could she know? No one asked, not yet. The captain's jaw tightened. He studied her like a puzzle piece he didn't want to fit into the picture. What she didn't tell them, what she couldn't tell them, was that she'd been in that valley before, alone, a year ago, and she still heard the sound of a radio cutting out mid-scream. The storm roared. The men sat with their doubts, their exhaustion, their fear. And she stood, calm. Every step she took inside that shelter told them the same unspoken truth. Storms could crush spirits, but storms could not break true resolve. Not hers. Not again. Why did she insist on moving now, when even the earth itself seemed to beg them to stay still? That was the question written on every man's face as they strapped on their gear. The captain gave the order without conviction. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed reluctance. "Pack up, we move east." No one argued aloud, but hesitation dripped from their movements. Fingers fumbled with straps. Boots slammed harder against the floor than necessary. They weren't following the captain's command. Not really. They were following her, though none of them would admit it. She didn't ask for their trust. She didn't demand it. She simply walked toward the storm like it had no teeth. And somehow they followed. The door groaned open. A blast of cold rain slapped them in the face. The sky above was a rolling bruise of black and gray, split by veins of lightning. The ground had become a sea of mud, eager to swallow anything that stepped too heavy. One by one, they pushed into it, rifles hugged close, packs weighed down with what little they had left. The storm drowned every sound except their own breathing. She was at the front, not because anyone appointed her, because she had already chosen it. Her stride was even, not fast, not slow, a rhythm born from discipline, not from urgency. She placed her boots where the ground looked most solid and the men copied her, stepping where she stepped. "Damn mud's pulling me down," the private muttered, almost swallowed by the storm. His pack leaned sideways, dragging him off balance. His voice cracked with panic. "I can't." Her hand shot back, firm. She caught him by the collar and yanked him upright before the mud could claim him. He stumbled forward, breathing hard, looking up at her as though she had hauled him out of the mouth of death itself. Her eyes met his for only a second, calm, silent. Then she turned forward again. No words, no comfort, just resolve. And strangely, that was enough. The captain pushed closer to her side, his jaw clenched against the rein. "You've walked this path before." It wasn't a question. She didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed locked on the valley ahead, a shadow carved into the land, waiting. "I have," she said simply. He waited for more, some explanation, but none came. She wouldn't tell him about the night she'd been here, alone, guided by intelligence reports that turned to lies in the dark. She wouldn't tell him about the signal she had chased, a voice on the radio begging for help until it ended in silence. She wouldn't tell him how long she had stayed in that valley, holding her breath, waiting for someone who never came out. No, not yet. The storm around them grew heavier, as though it had heard her thoughts and wanted to bury them. Time blurred into mud and lightning. The men staggered, cursed, gasped for breath. Packs pulled on their shoulders like anchors. Their weapons, once symbols of power, now dragged like iron chains. But she didn't falter. Every step of hers carved a path through despair. The private she had saved earlier panted behind her. His name was Carter, they'd said it earlier, in half a laugh that didn't last. He was 19. Too young to be here, too young to carry the weight of his rifle, let alone the storm. "Why are you so calm?" he finally asked, loud enough to reach her through the rain. She didn't answer. Because how could she explain that fear had already claimed her once, years ago, when she froze at the sound of her brother's voice vanishing into static? How could she explain that storms no longer frightened her because grief had already torn her apart and left her hollow? She simply kept walking. Her silence was the only answer. Carter's lips tightened, but strangely his steps grew steadier after that. The valley mouth loomed before them. Its walls rose sharp and jagged, slick with rain, funneling wind like the throat of a beast. The river that usually ran shallow there now swelled with muddy torrents, snarling against the rocks. "Hell no," the sergeant muttered, glaring at the narrow pass. "We can't go through that. Flash floods'll take us before we make it a quarter mile." The captain hesitated. The storm whipped his coat around him, plastered mud across his face. His eyes searched the valley like it might change if he stared long enough. Then he looked at her. Her expression was unreadable, but her steps never slowed. She entered the valley without a glance back. And like reluctant shadows, the others followed. Inside, the storm amplified. Wind screamed between the rock walls. Rain hammered so loud it felt like shrapnel. Visibility shrank to feet. She raised her fist. The men froze. Confused glances darted between them. And then they heard it. Not thunder, not rain, something else. A click. Metallic. Sharp. Her rifle rose before anyone else reacted. She dropped to one knee, cheek pressed to the stock, scope cutting through rain. Lightning flared, and for a heartbeat, she saw it. The faint silhouette of a muzzle glinting in the rocks ahead. "Ambush," she hissed. Gunfire erupted. The valley became chaos. Muzzles flashed through the rain, tracer rounds slicing orange streaks across the gray. Bullets smashed into rocks, splintering shards into the air. Men dove for cover, slipping in the mud. Shouts tangled with thunder. Carter screamed something incoherent, plastered against the ground. The sergeant fired wildly into the mist, hitting nothing but shadows. The captain tried to regain control, barking orders drowned by gunfire. But she was already moving. She slid behind a boulder, exhaled once, and let the storm cloak her rhythm. Through the scope, she found the glint of an enemy muzzle. One squeeze, the shape collapsed. She shifted, waited, another flash, another shot, another silence. Her breathing stayed even, her fingers steady. She wasn't faster than the storm. She was with it, timing her shots to thunder, letting lightning light her targets. Every kill echoed inside her chest, not with triumph but with weight, because each trigger pulled reminded her of the night she hadn't pulled in time, the night her brother's signal faded into static. Her voice, soft enough only she could hear, slipped past her lips. Not again. The storm raged on, but inside her, silence steadied her hand. And slowly the men felt it. The panic ebbed. Their fire became more precise, their shouts clearer. They weren't following orders. They were following her resolve. Minutes bled like hours. The ambush faltered. Bodies slid down rocks into the rushing water. The storm began to ease, thunder retreating into the distance. When the last shot rang, silence fell heavier than the rain. The men panted, dripping, rifles shaking in tired hands. No one cheered. No one dared call it victory. But they were alive. Alive because of her. Carter's eyes found her across the mud. He was shaking, but not from cold anymore, from something else, from awe. "You saved us," he whispered, voice cracking. She didn't respond, just lowered her rifle, wiped the rain from her cheek with the back of her glove, and looked into the valley ahead. The captain approached, boots squelching. His gaze lingered on her, calculating. "You've done this before." Her silence answered. Because what could she say? That this valley had once swallowed her failure whole, that she'd walked away with nothing but silence and a set of dog tags. Not yet. The storm had tested them. It had tried to crush them, and though they were battered, drenched, and shaken, they were still standing. Because she had walked calm steps into its heart, and proved storms could not break her. And now, by some miracle, storms could not break them either. Why did silence feel heavier after gunfire than before it? That was the question written on every man's face as they huddled in the valley's dripping shadows. The storm had softened, but the quiet that replaced it pressed down like a weight on their lungs. Rain still fell, but now it was just a whisper compared to what they'd endured. The bodies of their enemies lay strewn in the mud, dark shapes that blurred into the landscape. No one counted them. No one wanted to. They were alive, barely. Alive because she had seen the ambush before they had. Alive because her calm steadied their panic. Alive because of the silence that unnerved them but somehow kept them standing. Yet no one said thank you, not yet. Carter sat on a rock, helmet tilted back, rain dripping off his nose. His hands trembled as he checked his rifle, wiping mud from the barrel. He glanced at her every few seconds, as if trying to understand something he didn't have words for. The sergeant, older, broad-shouldered, leaned against the valley wall. He spat into the mud. His eyes were narrow, heavy with suspicion. He didn't like her. That much was clear, not because she saved them, but because she made them feel small. He broke the silence first. You knew they'd be waiting." His words cut through the damp air. All heads turned toward her. She didn't look at him. She sat on her haunches near a boulder, cleaning her rifle with deliberate care, wiping water from the scope, clearing mud from the chamber, every motion measured. "You knew," he repeated, voice harsher this time. "You don't just walk into an ambush and pull us out like that unless you knew." The captain's jaw tightened. He stepped between them. "Stand down, Sergeant." But the sergeant didn't. His voice rose, echoing off the stone walls. "We're following a ghost. She shows up, no insignia, no story, no past, and we're supposed to believe she just knew." Her hands stilled. Slowly she raised her head. Her eyes found his, calm, steady. And for a moment, even his anger faltered. Then she spoke. I knew because I've been here before. Her voice was low, controlled, but the words landed like a hammer. The men shifted, uneasy, curious. The sergeant scoffed, though his bravado cracked. And what happened last time? Did you walk out just as calm then too? She didn't answer immediately. She slid her rifle back across her shoulder and stood. The valley mist swirled behind her like smoke. Her silence was answer enough. The sergeant turned away with a curse, but his fists were clenched. The captain studied her a long time. He didn't press further, but his eyes told her he wanted to, needed to, just not here, not now. They moved on. The valley stretched narrow, forcing them into single file. The river snarled beside them, swollen and violent. The rocks above loomed like jagged teeth, shadows twisting with every flicker of lightning. Their boots sank ankle-deep in mud. Every step stole energy. The storm had passed, but its weight lingered in their bones. Carter fell in behind her, his breath ragged. He watched her shoulders move, the steadiness of her stride. She seemed tireless, inhuman. Finally, he whispered, barely audible over the rush of water, "Who are you?" She didn't answer. "Please," he pressed. I just need to know, because I was ready to die back there. And you never are, I can't figure out why." She slowed, just enough that he almost bumped into her. She turned her head slightly, meeting his wide, desperate eyes. And for the first time, her voice cracked. "I was once." Then she faced forward again. Her words echoed in Carter's chest long after they moved on. Hours blurred, rain thinned to drizzle, then mist. The sky cracked open just enough for a pale dawn light to filter through the valley. The storm had passed, leaving everything slick, raw, unsettled. They found cover beneath an overhang of rock, a small dry patch where they could finally collapse. Packs fell to the ground with heavy thuds. Men dropped onto the mud, too exhausted to care. The captain crouched, unrolling the map again. He squinted at it in the dim light, lines smudged from water damage. "We push north. 2 days, maybe 3 if the weather slows us. That's if the valley doesn't close on us first." The sergeant muttered, "That's if she doesn't lead us into another ambush." The captain ignored him, but his glance toward her was sharp, measuring. She sat apart, knees pulled up, rifle resting across them. Her head leaned back against the rock wall. Her eyes were closed but not asleep, listening, always listening. Carter sat beside her. He hesitated before speaking, his voice barely a whisper. "You said you were ready once. What did you mean?" Her eyes stayed closed. For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then her voice soft. "My brother, he was a soldier too. He went missing here, same valley, same storm." Carter's throat tightened. He glanced at her, at the way her face remained calm, but her voice betrayed something deeper. "I heard his last call," she continued. "On the radio. He begged for help. I froze. I didn't move. By the time I did, it was silence." Her eyes opened, fixed on the jagged sky above. "I thought the silence was punishment, but I learned it's not. It's just what's left when storms strip everything else away." Carter didn't know what to say. He stared at her, heart pounding. And suddenly she didn't seem inhuman anymore. She seemed broken, just differently than them. Night fell again. The fire they built was small, barely enough to warm their hands. Flames flickered weakly, their glow barely reaching the walls of the valley. One by one the men spoke, not about the mission, not about the storm, about themselves. The sergeant, gruff and hard, admitted he hadn't written his son in 3 years. "Didn't know what to say," he muttered. "Didn't think I'd be around to explain it anyway." Carter spoke of home, of a girl who waited but never promised. She said she'd wait, but I don't think she meant it. His laugh was bitter, cracking at the edges. The captain said nothing at first. He stared into the fire, the glow painting lines of exhaustion across his face. Finally, he said quietly, "I promised myself I wouldn't lose another squad, and here I am, already wondering how many of you make it out." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was human. It was the kind of silence that bound men together. She listened, every word, every pause, and though she didn't tell her story, not fully, they felt it, in her presence, in the steadiness of her breaths, in the way she didn't flinch when the wind rose again. When sleep finally came, it came hard. Bodies slumped, rifles clutched, breaths deep. But not her. She stayed awake, watching, listening. Her eyes tracked the darkness beyond the firelight. She heard the storm's last growl, distant on the horizon. And she whispered, so soft even she barely heard it. "You didn't die for nothing." Her hand brushed the dog tags hidden beneath her shirt. Cold, heavy, a weight she would carry until the valley itself swallowed her whole. The storm had tested them. It had tried to break them. And though they were battered, fractured, stripped raw, they were still here. Because she had walked calm steps into the storm and proved something the others had forgotten. Storms didn't end you. They revealed you. The valley tightened as they moved north, the walls drawing closer until the sky seemed like a thin slit above. The air smelled of stone and moss, damp with the storm's leftovers. The river carved its way beside them, foaming and restless, swallowing branches and debris as if it were hungry. They walked in a line that felt more fragile than formation, boots dragging, packs heavy. Every breath carried the exhaustion of men who had seen death and lived to regret it. The captain led from the front, map folded into the crook of his hand, eyes scanning every shadow. Behind him, the sergeant kept muttering low curses under his breath, as if each step through the valley was one step deeper into a grave he didn't agree to dig. Carter trudged with his rifle across his chest, eyes flicking constantly toward her, the woman who walked silent at the rear. Her silence hadn't broken since the night before. No explanation, no reassurance, just the steady rhythm of boots against mud and the cold gleam of watchful eyes. The men whispered about it when they thought she couldn't hear, but she always heard. She doesn't sleep. She doesn't eat. She doesn't even blink. It was easier for them to make her into something inhuman than to face the truth. She was the only reason they were still alive. By midday, the sky dimmed again. Clouds pressed low, heavy and bruised. Thunder murmured far away, as though warning them the storm hadn't truly finished with them yet. The captain raised a fist, signaling a halt. They collapsed against the rocks, chests heaving. "Check weapons, hydrate, 10 minutes." His voice was clipped, the kind that allowed no argument. The sergeant dropped onto a stone, pulling his canteen free. He didn't drink. He stared across the narrow space at her. Finally, he couldn't contain it. "This mission's cursed, and you're the curse walking with us." Carter stiffened. "Don't." But the sergeant's glare hardened. His voice grew sharp enough to cut. "She walks us into an ambush, claims she's been here before, says nothing else, and we're supposed to trust her. For all we know, she's leading us right into—" "Enough," the captain snapped. But she raised her hand, a simple gesture, calm, controlled, and everyone froze. She met the sergeant's eyes. Her voice was steady when it came. "I'm not your curse, I'm your mirror." The words fell into the space like stones into water. The sergeant sneered. "What the hell that's supposed to mean?" Her gaze didn't waver. "You see weakness in me because you fear it in yourself. You see silence in me because you can't bear your own." The sergeant surged to his feet, fists clenched. Carter jumped between them, rifle raised as if the valley itself might crack from the tension. But she didn't flinch, didn't move. She simply stood, her silence heavier than any threat. The captain's voice broke the standoff, harsh and final. "We move." The sergeant spat into the mud and shouldered his rifle. He turned away, muttering curses that none dared echo. But her words lingered. They clung to the air, to the men's thoughts, to the doubts they hadn't yet admitted. The valley narrowed further. Soon they were forced into single file again, the river roaring on one side, jagged walls on the other. The path twisted, unpredictable, each bend revealing more rock, more shadow, more places for death to wait unseen. She walked with her rifle angled low, eyes scanning not just the ridges above but the ground beneath. Her ears caught what others missed, the shift of stones too deliberate, the rustle of brush against the rhythm of the wind. She stopped suddenly. The squad froze. Her hand lifted slowly, pointing to the cliffside above. At first they saw nothing, just rock dark and wet. Then Carter's breath caught, a glint brief, sharp, like sunlight on steel. "Sniper," he whispered. The squad dove for cover. Bullets screamed, shattering stone inches from their heads. The valley exploded into chaos. Carter pressed against the mud, heart pounding. "We're pinned." The captain barked orders, his voice drowned by the echo of rifle fire. The sergeant cursed, blind firing up at the cliffs. But she moved differently, calm, precise. She slid behind a boulder, raised her rifle and waited, not for a target, for a rhythm. Her breathing slowed. The chaos faded around her. She listened for the silence between shots, the pause where the sniper adjusted, where the valley held its breath. There, her finger squeezed. The crack of her rifle was swallowed by the roar of the river, but the result was not. A body tumbled from the cliffs, striking stone before vanishing into the water below. The gunfire ceased. The valley echoed with emptiness again. The men stared. Carter's mouth hung open. The sergeant muttered something under his breath but didn't finish it. The captain's eyes lingered on her, sharp, conflicted. He gave a single nod, nothing more. They moved again, quieter, more careful. That night they found shelter in a shallow cave carved into the valley wall. It was barely wide enough for 6 men and a fire, but it was dry, and for now, safe. The firelight flickered against their tired faces. Shadows clung to the stone, deepening the hollows under their eyes. No one spoke at first. The only sound was the crackle of flames and the river's endless growl outside. Finally Carter broke it. His voice was soft, hesitant. "You saved us, twice now, but you don't even tell us your name." Her eyes lifted from the fire. The glow painted her features in warm gold, but her gaze was still cold. Names were heavy things. Names belonged to people with homes, with futures. She had neither. But she answered, quiet. "Evelyn." The name hung in the cave, simple, unadorned. The sergeant scoffed. "Evelyn, that's it. That's the ghost we're following." She didn't reply. Carter looked at her, his expression torn between relief and confusion. "Evelyn," he repeated softly, as if trying to make it fit the shape of her. The captain finally spoke, his voice low. "Why are you here?" The question silenced the fire itself. Her hands rested on her knees. She stared into the flames, and for a moment she seemed somewhere else, far away. "My brother came here," she said. "Years ago. His unit vanished in this valley. Command called it weather, terrain, bad luck, but I knew better." The flames danced in her eyes. "I came back to find him, to find what really happened, and I found silence." No one moved, no one breathed. The sergeant muttered almost to himself, "You're chasing ghosts." Her gaze lifted, sharp, unyielding. "Maybe, but ghosts don't lie." Sleep came in fragments that night. Men stirred, muttered in dreams, clutched rifles like lifelines. The storm had broken their bodies, but the valley was breaking their minds. Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat at the cave's edge, rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. The silence pressed against her, heavy, familiar. She thought of her brother's last words over the radio, his voice breaking, the storm drowning him out. "Don't let it take you too." Her grip tightened on the dog tags beneath her shirt. She whispered into the night, voice barely audible. "I won't." The river roared back, indifferent. By dawn the squad moved again. Their boots echoed hollow against the stone path, their breaths white in the cold morning air. Every man carried the memory of the night before, Evelyn's name, her story, her silence. The sergeant didn't speak, but his eyes lingered on her longer than before. Suspicion hadn't left him, but something else had joined it, something harder to admit. Respect. Carter walked beside her, shoulders hunched, steps heavy. He didn't ask more questions. He didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. The captain led on, jaw tight, eyes ahead. He was a man caught between doubt and faith, between command and survival. And the valley stretched before them, endless and merciless. Storms strip you down. They take away certainty. They take away comfort. They take away everything you thought you could depend on. But sometimes, storms leave something else behind. Clarity. And as the squad pressed deeper into the valley's throat, Evelyn knew. The worst was not the storm behind them. It was the silence ahead. What was buried here? The question followed every step as the squad pushed deeper into the valley. The cliffs pressed higher, blotting out the sky until light itself felt rationed. The air was colder now, sharp in their lungs, carrying the faint smell of iron that didn't belong to stone or water. Carter noticed it first. He frowned, pausing mid-step. "Do you smell that?" The sergeant sniffed the air, grimaced. "Blood." The captain raised his fist. The line froze. Their breaths clouded in the chill. The river thundered nearby, as though trying to drown whatever truth the valley was hiding. Evelyn moved forward, eyes scanning the ground. The mud grew darker in patches, slick with something more than rain. She knelt, fingertips brushing the soil, sticky, metallic, old but not ancient. She didn't say a word, just rose and kept walking. The others followed, their boots dragging in uneasy silence. They found the wreckage an hour later. It was half buried in stone and moss, hidden by time and storm. A twisted hulk of metal, jagged and burned. The tail of a transport helicopter, torn clean from the body. The insignia was faded but not gone. Carter's breath hitched. That's ours." The sergeant's jaw clenched. He spat into the dirt. No one said anything about a bird going down here. The captain's eyes scanned the wreck, his face unreadable. Command buried it, paperwork, false reports, storm cover story. His voice was low, bitter. Wouldn't be the first time. Evelyn's steps slowed. Her eyes locked on the bent steel, on the faded numbers along the side. Recognition struck her like a blade. Her brother's unit. She didn't speak it aloud, but her silence was enough. Carter saw the tremor in her hands, the way her chest tightened as though the valley itself had punched the air from her lungs. He whispered, "This is what you were looking for." She nodded once, tight, controlled, then turned away before the others could see the crack in her composure. They set up a perimeter, combing through the wreck. The inside smelled of mold and rust mixed with something older. Bones. Not many, but enough. The sergeant crouched, picking up a corroded dog tag from the mud. He wiped it clean with his thumb, squinting at the engraving. "Yeah," he muttered, voice low, "they didn't make it out." Carter swallowed hard. "Some did." The sergeant looked at him sharply. Carter pointed toward the rocks beyond the wreck. Faint carvings, lines scratched into stone, crude but deliberate. "Marks." The captain stepped closer, running his hand over the grooves. "Survivors marking days." Evelyn's stomach twisted. She stepped nearer, eyes narrowing. Not days, not tallies, words, half erased by rain but still there. "Storm won't end." Silence, waiting. "Don't trust." The last word was smudged, unfinished. Her chest tightened. She traced it with her finger, but the meaning slipped like smoke. The sergeant scowled. "This is madness. Whoever wrote that wasn't thinking straight." But Evelyn knew better. She could feel the weight of it. These weren't just scribbles, they were warnings. She stepped back, the river's roar filling the silence. Something about this place was wrong. Not just terrain, not just enemy fire, something deeper. And the valley remembered. That night they made camp near the wreck. The firelight flickered against bent steel, against the carved warnings in stone. The sergeant didn't eat. He sat with his back to the fire, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the dark. Finally he spoke. His voice was rough, stripped of bravado. "My brother didn't make it out either. Different valley, different storm. They said it was an accident, said it was quick." His jaw tightened, but lies always sound quick. No one answered. Even Evelyn stayed silent. Because she knew, lies were quick, truth was slow, truth bled. Carter poked the fire with a stick, sparks flying upward like lost prayers. Why cover it up? Why send us here without telling us what happened? The captain's face was a mask of stone. Because command doesn't care about ghosts, just objectives. The sergeant barked a humorless laugh. Then why are we here? The question hung heavy. No one dared answer. Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought of her brother's voice again, that final transmission swallowed by the storm. "Don't let it take you too." She opened her eyes, staring into the flames. She whispered, almost to herself, "We're here because someone has to finish it." The sergeant turned, his gaze sharp. "Finish what?" She met his eyes, calm, steady, the silence. Sleep came harder that night. The wreck groaned in the wind like it still remembered falling. The river roared as though trying to wash away the past. Carter dreamed of fire and metal, of faceless men shouting in a storm. He woke with a start, breath ragged. Evelyn was there, sitting upright, rifle ready, eyes scanning the dark. "You don't sleep," he whispered. She didn't answer. Carter hesitated, then asked, "Did you really come here just for him, for your brother?" Her eyes stayed fixed on the dark, but her voice, when it came, was soft. "He was the only one who believed I could do this. Everyone else said I was reckless, too quiet, too stubborn. He said silence wasn't weakness, said storms pass, said I'd understand when it mattered." Her throat tightened. "So I came here to prove him right." Carter swallowed, unsure what to say. Finally he murmured, "I think you already have." She didn't respond, but for the first time the silence felt less like distance, more like shelter. At dawn the captain gathered them. His face was pale, lined deeper by the weight of the valley. "We move north. Whatever happened here, it's not over. We finished the mission. Extract point is 5 clicks." The sergeant muttered, "If we make it that far." The captain's eyes hardened. "We will, but keep sharp. If her brother's unit went dark here, it wasn't by accident." Evelyn adjusted her pack, her rifle. Her jaw was tight, her steps deliberate. She could feel the valley breathing around her, heavy and watchful. Every stone, every shadow, every silence. They weren't just walking through terrain. They were walking through memory, through something that didn't want to be forgotten. By midday, the storm returned. Rain hammered down, turning the path into a slick ribbon of mud. The cliffs funneled the wind into howls, each gust stealing their breath. Visibility dropped. They pressed closer together, rifles angled outward. Then movement. A flicker across the ridge, shadows shifting where shadows shouldn't. The sergeant saw it first, contact. Gunfire erupted, echoing like thunder trapped in stone. The squad dove for cover, bullets sparking against rock. Carter shouted over the chaos, "Where are they?" But Evelyn didn't shout, she moved, calm, precise, sliding between boulders, eyes tracking the rhythm of fire. She counted 1, 2, pause. She raised her rifle, fired. A shadow toppled from the ridge. She shifted, fired again. Another fell. The squad held their ground, returning fire, but it was Evelyn who carved silence into the chaos, shot by shot, breath by breath. When the last echo faded, the valley was still again. Bodies lay scattered on the ridge above, not locals, not raiders, soldiers, armed, trained, disciplined. The captain's face was grim. "They knew we were coming." The sergeant growled, wiping rain from his face. "Then this isn't just a mission. This is a graveyard." Evelyn lowered her rifle, rain dripping from her hair. Her voice was steady. "No, this is a message." The captain looked at her sharply. "From who?" She stared at the ridge, at the silence that pressed harder than the storm. "From whoever doesn't want us to know the truth. Storms don't just break men, they bury them." And in the valley, buried truths were clawing their way back into the light. Why was it so quiet? After the firefight, the valley fell into a silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. Even the river, once roaring like endless thunder, seemed muted, as if something had smothered its voice. The squad moved with rifles raised, boots dragging through mud, each step a question mark. The sergeant muttered under his breath, "It's wrong. Valleys echo, bullets echo, but this one swallows everything whole." The captain gave no answer. His jaw was tight, eyes scanning every ridge. His silence was tactical, but Evelyn's silence was different. Her silence was listening. She heard it, the absence of sound. No birds, no insects, not even the scratch of rodents in the rocks, just their breathing, their boots, their fear. She glanced at the cliffs above, the rain running in silver streams down black stone. The storm had passed, but the air still hung thick, heavy, pressing on the chest. Her brother's last transmission whispered in memory, "Don't let it take you too." She tightened her grip on her rifle. She wouldn't. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge that overlooked the northern stretch of the valley. From there, they could see the path winding toward the extraction point, a flat clearing half a kilometer away, scarred by old burns. But something was wrong. Carter crouched beside her, eyes narrowing. No movement, no smoke, no signal. Shouldn't extraction have a marker? The sergeant spat into the mud. "If you believe command, sure, but I stopped believing back at that wreck." The captain raised binoculars, scanning the clearing. His silence stretched, then broke. "There's no extraction." The words hit like stones in their gut. Carter swore under his breath. The sergeant kicked a rock, sending it skittering down the slope. "So that's it, we're stranded." But Evelyn stayed still. She wasn't looking at the clearing. She was looking at the ridges around it, at the way shadows pooled unnaturally, at the faint lines cut into rock. Not natural, not storm. Camouflage. Her voice was low, almost lost in the wind. "It's a trap." The captain lowered the binoculars, eyes narrowing. "You're sure?" She didn't blink. "I'm sure." They retreated from the ridge, huddling under a cluster of boulders. The rain started again, light this time, a fine mist that clung to their faces. Carter's voice trembled with a frustration he tried to hide. "So what do we do? Sit here and wait to die?" The sergeant's glare hardened. "Or we walk straight into it and take as many of them with us as we can." The captain shook his head. "No, we move smarter than that." His gaze shifted to Evelyn. "You saw it before any of us. What are we looking at?" She closed her eyes for a moment, mapping the terrain in memory. Kill zone, elevated positions on 3 sides, clear line of sight to the clearing. Anyone stepping in would be gone in seconds. Carter whispered, "Then my brother was right, the valley itself, it kills." Evelyn's eyes snapped to him. For a moment, she saw not Carter but her brother. The way he'd smiled at her in uniform, teasing her about being too serious. The way his voice had broken over the radio in his last moments. She swallowed. Not the valley, the ones hiding in it. The captain's gaze sharpened. "Who?" Her silence stretched, but then she said it. "Not locals, not raiders, soldiers, trained, paid to stay invisible, paid to make this place a grave." The sergeant's jaw tightened. "By who?" Her voice was flat. "Command doesn't bury accidents this deep, they bury choices." No one spoke after that. The rain whispered against stone. The truth lingered heavier than the storm. That night they didn't light a fire. They huddled in the dark, packs against their backs, rifles in their laps. Every sound or lack of sound was sharper, cutting through nerves already frayed. The sergeant leaned against his rifle, voice low. I had a son. He's 5 now. Last time I saw him, he was too busy building towers out of blocks to notice me leaving. His mother said he cried after I closed the door, but I wasn't there to hear it. The words were not for anyone in particular, just for the dark. Carter shifted, eyes down. My sister sent me letters every week during deployment. Said she baked cookies she'd save until I came home. They'd be stale by now. The silence that followed was unbearable, so Evelyn broke it. My brother taught me how to shoot. He said if I ever got scared, I should listen for the silence between breaths. That's where control lies. Her voice cracked then the first time in front of them. He died in a place like this, and now I know why. The men didn't answer, but something shifted in the dark. Not trust, not yet, but a thread, fragile, human. At dawn they moved again. No words, just silent formation. The captain didn't lead from the front this time. He let Evelyn move ahead, her steps careful, her gaze scanning every stone. The others followed, their doubts pressed down by something harder than faith, necessity. They skirted the clearing, hugging the rocks, moving like shadows. Evelyn's heart pounded with each step, waiting for the crack of a rifle, the storm of fire. But it didn't come, not yet. Instead, they reached higher ground. From there, the truth unfolded. Hidden bunkers carved into the ridges, camouflage nets pulled over steel, faint trails of smoke venting from narrow pipes. Not a ghost valley, not a cursed storm. An operation. The sergeant cursed under his breath. Son of a, they built this. They've been here all along. The captain's face hardened. Not built, hidden. He lowered his binoculars. Someone doesn't want us walking out with this knowledge. Carter's voice cracked. So extraction was never real. Evelyn whispered. It was real enough to bring us here. The squad pulled back, finding cover under jagged stone. The rain eased, leaving only the drip of water off cliffs. The captain laid it out. 2 options. We fight through, try to take the ridge, signal for help, or... The sergeant finished for him, or we disappear like the rest. Carter looked between them, eyes wide. That's not a choice, that's suicide. But Evelyn stayed calm. She studied the terrain, the bunkers, the silence, and she remembered her brother's voice, urging her not to let the valley take her too. Her hand tightened on her rifle. There's a third option. The men turned to her. She met their eyes, her silence heavier than orders. We make the silence break. That night they prepared, not with hope, not with certainty, but with resolve. The sergeant cleaned his rifle in silence, hands steady. Carter checked his ammo 3 times, then sat with his back against the stone, eyes distant. The captain mapped the terrain on the dirt, jaw tight. And Evelyn sat apart, dog tags in her hand, lips pressed to the cold metal. She whispered so low the others couldn't hear, "For you." The valley didn't answer, but the silence felt thinner, as if it was listening. Storms can crush, but silence can strangle. And sometimes the only way to live is to make it speak. The rain stopped before dawn. The clouds shredded into ribbons across the peaks, leaving the valley sharp and cold under a pale sky. For the first time since the storm began, shafts of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the clouds, striking the ridges with silver fire. But the light didn't make the valley safer. It made the traps clearer. From where Evelyn crouched, she could see the outlines now, not obvious, not to the untrained eye. But to her, every fold in the rock, every unnatural angle, every glint of steel beneath camouflage stood out like scars on skin. The silence pressed against her ears, heavy as a command. Her brother had always told her silence was her ally, that when the world was too loud, too fast, silence gave her control. But here, silence wasn't ally, it was enemy. It kept the killers hidden. It gave their ambush its strength. And she was done letting it rule. The squad huddled under jagged stone. The captain drew lines in the dirt with a stick, his jaw tense. 3 nests here, he murmured. 2 more dug into this ridge. Fire lanes cross the clearing, it's a cage. The sergeant shook his head. Even if we storm one nest, the others pin us down. We'd be shredded before we cleared 20 meters. Carter looked pale, his hands twitching around his rifle. Then we don't storm, we wait. Maybe night will give us cover. But Evelyn broke in, her voice low, steady. Waiting won't change anything. They own this valley. They've killed before. They'll kill again. Night just means we won't see it coming. The captain's eyes lifted to her, sharp. Then what's your play? She didn't hesitate. We make them fire first. The men stared at her. The sergeant scowled. You're asking us to walk into their kill zone. Evelyn's gaze was unwavering. No, I'm asking us to force them out of it. If they stay hidden, silence wins. If they break cover, silence dies. The captain studied her, then the dirt map, then the faces of his men. He exhaled through his nose. Risky. The sergeant muttered, insane. Carter whispered, but maybe it's the only way. They set the plan in motion by noon. The captain and the sergeant moved toward the western ridge, skirting the rocks, keeping low. Carter stayed back as reserve, nervous but resolute. Evelyn went forward alone. She stepped out onto the clearing's edge. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Her boots sank into wet earth. Her rifle stayed low, not raised, not threatening. She walked with slow, measured steps, her heart pounding against her ribs. She thought of her brother, thought of the last time she'd heard his voice, thought of how he died unseen, swallowed by silence. Not this time. The moment stretched, unbearable. Then it broke. A crack of a rifle split the air. Dirt burst at her feet. The silence shattered. Gunfire erupted from the ridges. Tracers stitched the air, carving lines of fire across the clearing. Evelyn dove to the ground, rolling behind a half-buried boulder. The captain barked orders into the comms. The sergeant's rifle thundered in reply, pinning one nest with suppressive fire. Carter, voice shaking, called out targets from the rear. But Evelyn wasn't hiding. She slid her rifle up the rock, eyes narrowing through the scope. She scanned the ridge's movement, shadows, muzzle flashes. She squeezed the trigger. One shadow fell. Another scrambled back. Her pulse steadied with each shot. Not calm, not peace, but purpose. The silence wasn't suffocating now. It was breaking apart with every report, every echo, every scream. Her brother's voice whispered in memory, between breaths. She exhaled, fired again. The enemy was skilled. They shifted positions fast, never staying exposed. But Evelyn was faster. She read the terrain, anticipated their movement, cut them down when they tried to relocate. The sergeant roared with savage glee as his rounds punched through a bunker slit, silencing a gunner. The captain's calm precision dropped targets one after another. Even Carter, though his hands shook, managed to hit a shadow scrambling across the ridge. The ambush was no longer silent, it was war. And war was where Evelyn's silence turned to steel. Minutes dragged like hours. The clearing became a battlefield, smoke and dust rising, bullets cracking against stone. Evelyn felt the sting of shrapnel tear across her sleeve, but she ignored it. Her focus stayed on the scope, on the next shot, the next breath. But then a cry. Carter's voice raw with panic, man down. Her head snapped toward the western ridge. The sergeant lay sprawled, his rifle clattering down the rocks, blood spreading across his chest. The captain was dragging him back, teeth gritted against enemy fire. For a second, Evelyn froze. The sergeant's laughter from the night before, his story of his son, flashed in her mind. She forced it down, forced herself to move. Her rifle barked again and again, cutting down the shadows that pinned the captain. She shouted, her voice breaking the valley louder than any bullet. Go, get him out. The captain hauled the sergeant into cover. Carter scrambled to meet them, dragging a field kit from his pack. But Evelyn didn't move to join them. She stayed at the edge of the clearing, rifle steady, holding the silence at bay. The gunfire slowed, not stopped, never stopped, but shifted. The enemy was pulling back, regrouping. Evelyn scanned the ridges. Through the smoke, she saw one bunker door crack open, shadows slipping inside. Another nest fell silent, abandoned. She knew what that meant. "They're consolidating," she hissed into comms. "They'll push back harder." The captain's voice came back, low and grim. "Sergeant's hit bad, we don't have long." Her chest tightened, but her voice stayed firm. "Then we don't give them time." She pushed forward, not into the clearing, but toward the rocks that led up to the ridges. Her boots dug into mud and stone. Her rifle was slung now, replaced with her sidearm for close range. The climb tore at her hands, cut her palms on sharp rock, but she didn't stop. The silence wasn't smothering anymore. It was breaking, splintered, bleeding. And she would finish the job. At the ridge, she pressed herself against stone, breathing hard. She heard footsteps inside the bunker, voices sharp and clipped in a language she half recognized. Soldiers, disciplined. She slipped inside. The bunker was dim, lit by a single red bulb. The stench of oil and cordite hung in the air. Crates lined the walls, stamped with codes she knew weren't local supply. Evidence. But no time. The shadows turned toward her, muzzles flashed. She moved. Her pistol barked, each shot precise. The first man dropped, the second staggered, the third rushed her with a knife. She twisted, slammed him into the wall, drove the blade back into his chest. Her silence was gone. But her purpose had never been clearer. Outside, the captain's voice roared in the comms. "Pull back, they're coming in waves." Carter's panicked reply, "Sergeant, losing blood fast." Evelyn emerged from the bunker, smoke trailing behind her. She slid behind a rock, reloading with blood-slick hands. Her eyes lifted to the horizon. The valley was alive with gunfire now. No more illusion of silence. No more myth of a cursed storm. Just men, just killers, just the truth. She whispered to herself, words only the wind could hear. "You can rest now, brother, I broke it." The cost was already heavy. The sergeant bleeding, the squad dwindling, the enemy still strong. But Evelyn had done it. The silence was broken. And now the valley would burn. The mountains did not forgive. They echoed every shot, every scream, every breath of men fighting for ground no map would ever mark. The valley, once suffocating in silence, was now alive with thunder, a storm of fire and steel. Evelyn crouched behind a jagged boulder, her pistol hot in her hand, her rifle strapped across her back. Smoke rose from the bunker she'd cleared. Her heartbeat was steady, but her breaths came ragged, as though the valley itself was pulling the air from her lungs. On the comms, the captain's voice was strained. "They're regrouping 2 squads, maybe more. We can't hold them here." Carter's voice broke in, frantic. "The sergeant's fatting, sir. He needs medevac now or he won't make it." Evelyn pressed her head back against the rock, eyes closing for half a second. The sergeant's laughter from 2 nights ago replayed in her mind, his story of his son, his promise to go home. The thought of his son's face, waiting, tightened something deep inside her chest. No, she couldn't let silence claim another voice. She keyed the comm. "Captain, I'll draw them, get him out." There was a pause. The valley's gunfire filled the space between her words and the captain's answer. When it came, his voice was quiet. "That's suicide." Evelyn's lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. So was staying quiet. She moved fast. Up the ridge, cutting across loose rock, climbing higher where the enemy would see her. She didn't sneak, didn't crawl. She wanted their eyes. She wanted their fire. And she got it. Bullets shredded the stone around her, ricocheting sparks into the air. She ducked, rolled, came up with her rifle in hand. Through the scope she found the first muzzle flash. She squeezed. The man fell. Another shadow rose, another shot dropped him. Her shots weren't just to kill, they were to shout, to scream into the valley, "Here, I'm here." Below, the captain and Carter dragged the sergeant down into a ravine, hidden by smoke. She caught glimpses between bursts of gunfire, Carter's pale face, streaked with dirt, his mouth moving in prayer. The captain's broad shoulders straining with the sergeant's weight. They were going. They were getting out. Her chest eased, even as the enemy fire pinned her tighter against the rocks. This was the trade, her silence for their voices. But the enemy wasn't reckless. They had discipline. They didn't rush her, didn't waste lives in blind charges. They spread, circling, rifles braced steady, step by step tightening the net. Evelyn knew the math. Ammunition low, her arm bleeding from a deep graze, her body heavy from hours without pause. Still, she held her ground. She fired between breaths. She shifted angles, forcing them to duck, forcing them to slow. Each second she bought was another heartbeat for the sergeant. But seconds had a cost. A shot cracked past her shoulder, hot air burning her cheek. Another splintered rock near her temple. She flinched, slid lower, her rifle clattering against stone. Her hands shook. Her brother's voice echoed in memory. "When fear takes your hands, let your heart guide them." She gripped the rifle tighter and rose again. Through her scope, she caught sight of something different, an officer, his posture straighter, his uniform sharper, shouting orders from behind cover. Not just another soldier, the one pulling the strings. Her vision narrowed. The world shrank to the space between the crosshairs and his chest. She exhaled. But before she fired, another voice broke the moment. Carter's, raw and pleading in the comms. "She's not moving, Captain, she's staying up there." The captain's reply was a growl. "She knew what she was doing, Carter, keep moving." Evelyn's throat tightened. She almost wanted to tell Carter it was okay, that sometimes one person stood so the rest could leave, but she kept her silence. Words were wasted now. She fired. The officer jerked, staggered, and fell. The enemy line rippled with confusion. A roar of voices, men shouting, hesitation cutting through their fire. Evelyn used the moment. She slid down the rock, firing again and again, until her rifle clicked empty. Then she ran. The ridge led her to a narrow outcrop, a knife edge of stone overlooking the whole valley. The wind tore at her hair, cold and merciless. Below, she could see the ravine where the captain's team disappeared into shadow, carrying the sergeant with them. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. They had a chance. But behind her, boots thundered. Voices rose. The enemy had followed. She turned. A dozen shapes moved through the smoke, rifles raised, eyes burning with fury. Her hand found her last magazine, slid it home. 12 against 1. Her brother's face filled her mind. The day he'd left. The medal they'd given her after his death, meaningless metal pressed into her palm. The silence that had followed, the silence she'd carried like a chain. Now she knew. The silence wasn't something to endure. It was something to break. She raised her rifle. The first man fell. The second stumbled. She moved with the storm, each shot a heartbeat, each heartbeat a promise. Her body screamed, but her resolve burned hotter. Bullets tore into the rock, ripped across her shoulder, punched into her side. Pain flared white, but she stayed standing. One step back, one more, until there was no more stone. The valley opened behind her, sheer and endless. Her rifle clicked empty again. The enemy paused, circling, wary of her even in her last breath. Evelyn lowered her weapon. She looked past them over the valley to where the captain and Carter carried the sergeant toward life, toward voices that would not be silenced. She whispered almost a prayer. "Storms don't break resolve, they reveal it." Then she stepped forward. The captain never saw her fall. He only heard the echo of gunfire fade, the valley's storm settling into a heavy, final hush. Carter asked once, his voice cracked and breaking. Did she make it out? The captain didn't answer. He didn't need to. Some truths lived in silence. Months later, in a quiet hangar far from the mountains, the sergeant stood on crutches, alive, his chest scarred but his voice steady. He handed a folded note to Carter. "She left this in her pack," he said softly. Carter unfolded it, hands trembling. The words were few, written in a firm, steady hand. "If silence takes me, don't let it take you too." The story of the valley was never written in reports. The operation remained classified, buried beneath numbers and lines. But for those who were there, the memory lived. In the laughter of the sergeant's son when his father came home. In the tremor of Carter's hands when he spoke her name. In the captain's long stares at the horizon, as if listening for a voice only he could hear. And in the silence, now broken, forever marked by the calm steps of one woman who refused to let storms win. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it does, it lingers, not in medals, not in monuments, but in the quiet strength it leaves behind.